I'm Emily. I'm 29. 6 weeks before my wedding, my future mother-in-law texted me a picture of the dress she'd bought for the ceremony, and it was white. Not eggshell, not champagne, not technically ivory if you squint. White. The same shade as the sample gown hanging in my closet. I stared at that photo for probably 4 full minutes before I typed anything back. Then I set my phone down, made a cup of tea I never drank, and decided I wasn't going to say a single word to her about it. I want to explain how I got to that decision because on paper it sounds petty, changing a catering order instead of just telling a woman not to wear white to my wedding. But if you knew Diane, you'd understand that telling her things directly never worked. It just gave her something to perform outrage about, so I found a different lever, the open bar. Let me back up. I'm a project coordinator for a commercial construction firm in Ohio. My fiancé, Ryan, is 31, works in logistics, and is one of the calmest, kindest men I've ever met. Which is honestly part of the problem, because his mother has spent his whole life training him to avoid conflict with her at any cost. Diane is 58. She's not a cruel person in the obvious sense. She's never screamed at me, never insulted me to my face. She's the kind of difficult that's hard to explain to people who haven't lived it, the kind where every gathering somehow becomes about her, and if you point that out, you're the one who looks unreasonable. Some background, so you understand the pattern, because none of what she did was random. At Ryan's sister's baby shower 2 years ago, Diane wore a dress that was nearly identical in color to the mother-to-be's outfit, and when someone commented on it, she laughed and said, "Great minds." At Ryan's cousin's engagement party, she stood up during the toasts, uninvited, and gave a 5-minute speech about her own 30-year marriage. At Christmas, she has a habit of buying the biggest, most expensive gift in the room for whichever grandchild is currently getting attention, timed exactly to interrupt whatever else is happening. Small things individually. A pattern once you stacked them up. Ryan and I got engaged in April of last year on a hiking trail in the Hocking Hills. Nothing fancy, just the two of us, and a ring I'd actually helped pick out because he wanted me to have something I loved rather than something that surprised me. We set the date for the following June, a full 14 months out, and booked a vineyard venue about 40 minutes outside Columbus. Budget was tight. We were paying for most of it ourselves, with my parents contributing toward the reception and Ryan's parents offering to cover the open bar as their gift, which at the time felt generous and sweet. That offer from Gary and Diane came up over dinner about 8 months before the wedding. Gary, my father-in-law, is a quiet, decent man who mostly just wants peace in his own house, and I think the bar offer was genuinely his idea as much as hers. "Let us do the bar," he said. "Diane wants to help make it special." I remember Diane adding almost immediately, "And I know all the good vendors. I'll handle the whole thing, don't you worry about a thing." I should have heard that sentence for what it was. I'll handle the whole thing, but at the time I just said thank you, because who argues with free alcohol at their wedding? Over the following months, "I'll handle the bar" turned into Diane picking specific top-shelf bourbons she wanted served, specific wine labels, a whole cocktail menu named after inside jokes from her friend group that none of my side would understand. She started referring to it, in front of other people, as "my gift to the kids," in a tone that made it sound less like a gift and more like a sponsorship with her name attached. She asked our venue coordinator, without checking with me first, whether there'd be a moment during cocktail hour to toast the bar, her exact words, as though the alcohol itself needed a dedicated spotlight. I let it go. Ryan let it go. That's what we did with Diane, generally. You picked your battles, and an open bar didn't feel worth a fight. The dress was different. It was a Tuesday evening in early May when she sent me the photo. She'd gone dress shopping with her sister, my future aunt-in-law, and texted me a picture from the dressing room mirror with the caption, "Found the dress. What do you think?" It was a floor-length gown, structured bodice, subtle beading at the waist, and it was white. Genuinely, unmistakably white, the exact category of white my own dress lived in. I called Ryan first, not her. "Did you see what your mom's wearing?" I asked. "The picture?" "Yeah, she sent it to me too." I figured she meant it's like creamish. "Ryan, it's white. It's the same white as my dress." There was a pause on the line, the kind of pause I'd come to recognize as him doing math about how much this was going to cost him at home if he said anything. "I'll talk to her," he said, which is what he always said, and which almost never actually happened the way I hoped. He did bring it up, to his credit. He called her 2 days later and asked, gently, whether she might consider something with more color, since it was pretty close to what I was wearing. I wasn't on the call, but he told me what she said afterward, and I remember it word for word because it made my stomach turn. "Oh honey, it's not white, it's more of a soft ivory." Nobody's going to confuse me with the bride. I'm 58 years old. That's the sentence that told me exactly how this was going to go, not a denial that the color was close, a dismissal of the concern itself, wrapped in a little joke about her age, so that pushing back further would make me the one who seemed insecure. I tried once more myself, over the phone, a week later. I kept it as light as I could. Diane, I saw the dress you picked out. It's really pretty, but it's pretty close in color to my gown. Would you mind maybe looking at something with a little more color to it? Even a blush or a soft gold would be gorgeous on you. Emily, sweetheart, I've had this exact conversation with 3 other people already, and everyone says I'm overthinking it. It reads ivory in person. Photos can be deceiving. Then, before I could respond, anyway, I have to run. I've got the caterer on the other line about your bar. That was the whole conversation. She didn't yell. She didn't even really argue. She just redirected, thanked me for my concern that I hadn't gotten to finish expressing, and hung up holding all the same ground she'd started with. I want to be honest about something. Part of me considered just letting it go, the way we let go of the toast, the bar comment, and the bourbon list and everything else. Weddings are stressful. Mothers-in-law are a known genre of stressful, and I told myself maybe it really would read as ivory under the tent lighting. Then my future sister-in-law, Jenna, forwarded me a screenshot that changed my mind completely. It was from a family group chat I wasn't in, one of Diane's sisters and a couple of her longtime friends. Jenna sent it to me with the caption, "You need to see this, I'm sorry." The screenshot showed Diane writing, in response to someone asking about the wedding, "Honestly, between us, I think it'll be good for people to see there's more than one important woman in that family. Ryan's whole life, people have made such a fuss over whoever he's dating. I bought a gorgeous dress, and I'm not apologizing for looking good at my own son's wedding." Below that, one of her friends had written back, "Girl, you're going to steal the show, lol," with a laughing emoji, and Diane had responded with a single word, "Good." I sat with that message for a long time. Not because it was some shocking betrayal exactly. Diane had never pretended to love the spotlight less than she did, but because it confirmed this wasn't confusion about a dress color. It was intentional. She wanted to be, in her own words, an important woman at my wedding, on the same day I was supposed to be the one thing everyone was looking at. I didn't confront her with the screenshot. Jenna begged me not to bring it up directly, worried it would blow up the whole family before the wedding even happened, and honestly, I didn't want to spend my last month of engagement in a shouting match either. But something shifted in me that night. I stopped trying to convince Diane to change. I started thinking about what I actually had control over. And what I had control over, it turned out, was the open bar she'd appointed herself the queen of. Here's the thing about Diane that most people who only see her at holidays don't fully register. She drinks. Not falling down every single day drinking, but at any event with an open bar. By hour 3, she is loud. She is grabbing the microphone if there's a microphone available, and more than once she said something at a family party that people are still awkwardly referencing years later. At Jenna's rehearsal dinner, she commandeered the toast and made it a 15-minute story about her own wedding day. At Gary's retirement party, she got into an actual shouting match with her sister over something nobody could later explain, fueled almost entirely by an open bar and free-flowing champagne. Everyone in the family had a version of a Diane at 3 drinks in story. It was practically a running joke, right up until it was happening to you. She had built her entire self-appointed role at my wedding around that bar. My bar, my mother-in-law's dress, my spotlight, in her words, and she had made herself the person controlling the alcohol that would fuel her own worst behavior, at the exact event where she'd already decided to compete with me for attention. So about 4 weeks before the wedding, I called our venue coordinator and quietly asked to restructure the beverage plan. I didn't cancel Diane and Gary's gift outright because Gary genuinely meant well and I didn't want to hurt him. Instead, I called Gary directly, thanked him sincerely for the generous offer, and told him that after looking at the numbers with our planner, Ryan and I had decided to simplify the bar ourselves to keep the whole evening running smoother, and that we'd love if they'd redirect that gift toward the honeymoon fund instead, which was true, we did want that, and it also happened to solve my problem in one move. Gary, being Gary, said that sounded lovely and never asked a single follow-up question. I never told Ryan the full reasoning. I told him part of the truth, that I didn't love the idea of his mom having planning control over something at our own wedding, and he agreed without needing much convincing, because even he had started to feel uneasy about how much my gift language had crept into her vocabulary. With the vendor, I made 3 specific changes. First, no top-shelf liquor, beer, wine, and champagne for the toasts, full stop, no bourbon list with her curated names on it. Second, the bar would open during cocktail hour and close for a scheduled 90-minute window during dinner and speeches, opening back up afterward for dancing, a completely normal, common structure that our coordinator said she recommends to nearly every couple to control costs and keep speeches from getting chaotic. And third, after 10 p.m., it converted to a cash bar for anything beyond beer and wine. Again, standard stuff, nothing scandalous, nothing anyone would think twice about if they didn't know the backstory. To Diane, I said nothing at all. Not one word about the dress, not one word about the bar. When she mentioned, a week before the wedding, some cocktail name she wanted served, I just smiled and said, "We actually finalized the bar menu with the venue, but I really appreciate everything you and Gary have done." True. vague, unchallengeable. The wedding was the second Saturday in June, 78 degrees, clear sky, the vineyard looking exactly like the photos that made me book it in the first place. Diane arrived in the white dress. I saw her from the bridal suite window as guests started filing in, and my stomach dropped even though I'd known it was coming for 6 weeks. It really was white. Not ivory, not cream, white, standing out sharply against the pale gold of the ceremony arch. Several guests, I found out later, actually asked each other quietly whether she was supposed to be wearing that. My own mother, Carol, saw her from the parking lot and had to be talked down by my aunt before she stormed over to say something. I didn't go say anything either. I got married. The ceremony itself was actually beautiful, and honestly, once I was standing at that arch looking at Ryan, Diane's dress mattered a lot less than I'd built it up to in my head over the previous month. That part surprised me. I think I'd spent so much energy dreading it that the actual moment couldn't live up to the dread. Cocktail hour is where things started to unravel for her though, and this part I mostly heard secondhand and pieced together afterward, since I was doing photos. Diane had apparently been telling her friend group for weeks about the incredible bar Gary and I are doing, bragging, according to Jenna, about specific bourbon selections that no longer existed in the actual plan. When her friends started asking the bartender for the drinks Diane had described, and the bartender had no idea what they meant because it was a simple beer, wine, and champagne setup, Diane apparently went to find our coordinator and asked, with some heat, why the menu had been changed without telling her. The coordinator, completely correctly, told her that the final beverage order had come directly from the bride and groom, and that any changes to gifts arranged through the couple needed to go through them. I wasn't there for that conversation, but Jenna was standing close enough to hear it, and she told me later that Diane's face went through about 4 different expressions in the span of 10 seconds, landing somewhere between embarrassed and furious before she said stiffly, "Well, I'm sure it's fine," and walked away toward the parking lot. She came back about 20 minutes later, and it was obvious to more than one person that she'd had something from outside the venue, a flask, we found out later, tucked in her clutch, something Jenna had actually noticed her carrying at 2 other family events before but never thought much of. By the time dinner service started, Diane was loud. Not dramatic movie loud, but the specific loud that everyone in that family recognized and dreaded. She interrupted the best man's toast to ask, at full volume, whether anyone else thought the bar was a little cheap for a wedding this size. A few people laughed awkwardly, assuming it was some kind of joke. It wasn't. During the father of the bride's speech, my own dad's speech, she stood up in the middle of it to go refill her glass, her chair scraping loudly against the venue floor in the sudden quiet, and several guests told me afterward that the sound alone made half the room wince. The moment that actually broke things open happened during the toasts, when Diane stood up uninvited, the same way she had at Jenna's rehearsal dinner, and reached for the microphone stand near the head table, announcing that she wanted to say a few words as the mother of the groom. Our coordinator, thankfully, had been briefed weeks earlier, quietly and generally, that speeches were locked to a specific list, no open floor, standard practice for timeline reasons, and she stepped in smoothly and told Diane the microphone was reserved for the scheduled speakers, that she was welcome to speak with Ryan and me privately afterward if she'd like. That's when Gary finally did something. I'd watched Gary spend the entire wedding the way he spends most family events, quiet, a little tense, absorbing whatever Diane did without comment. But something in his face changed watching her reach for that microphone in front of 200 people. He stood up, walked over, and put his hand gently but firmly on her arm, and I couldn't hear what he said, but I saw her face crumple slightly, the anger draining into something closer to embarrassment, and she sat back down. She left about 40 minutes later, before the cake was even cut, telling a few people she had a headache. Gary stayed the rest of the night, danced with me during the parent dance Diane was supposed to share part of, and apologized quietly, just once, saying, "I should have said something to her weeks ago. I'm sorry, Emily. This was your day." I told him it was okay. I mostly meant it. The rest of the wedding was genuinely wonderful. My mom cried during our first dance. Ryan's sister Jenna gave a toast that actually made me cry, the good kind. The beer and wine ran the entire night without a single complaint from anyone except one guest. Nobody remembers weddings for what the bar didn't have. They remember them for how they felt, and by every account I got afterward, ours felt joyful. It's been about 5 months now. Diane and I haven't talked about the dress, not directly, not once, and I don't think we ever will. But something did shift. At Thanksgiving, she was quieter than I'd ever seen her, almost deferential, complimenting the meal Ryan and I hosted without trying to redirect any attention toward herself. Gary told Ryan privately that he and Diane had had a long talk after the wedding, and that Gary had told her, for maybe the first time in 30 years of marriage, that her behavior that day had embarrassed the whole family, including him. I don't know if that conversation will stick. People like Diane don't usually change in one clean arc, and I'm not naive enough to think one uncomfortable Thanksgiving fixed 30 years of a pattern. But I do know this. I never raised my voice. I never confronted her about the dress, the texts, or the flask. I never gave her the fight she seemed to want. The one where she gets to be the wronged party defending her right to look nice at her son's wedding. I just changed the bar, and it turned out that was the only leverage I ever needed.